Hi, this is Misha. This is part 2, kind of a continuation of the original on the Swiss military sidearms. Part 1, we looked at the Schmidt 1882 revolver. We looked at its improved and economized replacement, the 1929. We looked at Switzerland's first, and really anyone's first, official full adoption self-loading gun. This is the Luger. This is the 1906 model. There was a 1900 before it, but not many were made of those. And then we looked at the improved and economized Swiss version of the Luger, the 1929, and that's where we left off. At the end of World War II, this was very much in production, and this was Switzerland's most up-to-date service gun, but by the nature of the Swiss military, all of these could be found in service, because old guns were really never declared obsolete. They just kind of got cycled further and further back in the ranks. But let's move on to the most famous Swiss pistol, the SiG P210, or Pistol 1949 in the military. The previous 4 guns were all chambered for a .30 caliber cartridge, so while accurate and low recoiling wasn't especially powerful. This is in 9mm Parabellum, 9x19 Luger, so respectable cartridge. It actually dates back to the 1930s. In 1937, Switzerland purchased the rights to manufacture the Model 1935A from France, the company of SACM, and that was actually designed by Charles Petter, who was originally born in Switzerland. So it was kind of initially a Swiss design, although it was patented in France and all that. Now, they would play with the design. There's all kinds of crazy prototypes. Forgotten Weapons has videos on them. I mean, double stacks and all kinds of things. But by 1947, they had settled on basically this here. And by the time they got to it, there's not a lot left of the original 1935A pattern, except maybe this still very nice ergonomic grip. What we have here is a very good, if a bit conservative, still pistol. We're still single action only. We have a 4.8 inch barrel. Its most unique feature is that the slide rides inside the frame. So the rails are reversed from most pistols. This had several benefits, accuracy being probably the best. Also dependability, because you have this all enclosed, it was not terribly susceptible to stuff. Sorry guys, I gotta pull this out, but that shows me our next thing anyway. This also has a magazine disconnect safety, as you see, as well as a manual safety, although not terribly ergonomic here. And as you saw, the heel is the mag release, so we've kind of gone away from that Luger pattern. We still have an 8-round magazine though. And that's pretty much it. These have legendary nice triggers. Probably the best for a military issue service gun. Certainly not the best pistol in the world, but for a standard military issue gun, they do. This is the 210-2, which was the P49 version. It has a matte blued finish with Bakelite type grips, fixed sights, lanyard ring. Let me flip it around here. The 210-1 was the commercial version, identical to this except it had a polished blued finish and wood grips. There would also be the 210-3, which was like the 1, but it was designed for Swiss police. The 210-4 was designed for West German police. It was essentially the same, except it had no lanyard loop. I guess I didn't want one. And it had a loaded chamber indicator. Then the -5, 6, 7, and 8 were all different versions of target type guns. You would have ones with adjustable sights, longer barrels. The Dash 7, for example, was a 22 only. These could also be purchased in 30 caliber Luger, 7.65 Parabellum, so on and so forth. They were very popular for target shooters, one of the finest guns of its day, with a very fine price tag to match. These were expensive to manufacture and thus expensive for the Swiss military, the Swiss Army, to purchase. This is machined slide and frame. Everything's just very precisely fitted. But to be fair, it has a few weird things. For one thing, it is a single action, which by the 1950s wasn't strange, but by the 60s was getting a little obsolete. While the grip angle is very ergonomic and the trigger is very nice, the location of the safety is kind of odd, and it's a very stiff safety. You can't just flick it up easily. It's on. It's very positive, I guess you could say. And the slide release is quite a ways up there. And of course, most all we have this very noticeable, it's large but still stiff, heel mag release, which to a lot of Americans is bizarre. I will also say that because the way the slide is made, your serrations are quite small. So when things are great, it's easy to grab. But when your hands are wet, dirty, in gloves, that could be a problem. And while it's a very smooth slide, it is stiff. This uses a modified Browning style system, one we're very familiar with today, where the barrel tips down. So nothing terribly remarkable there. So by today's standards, it's a very finely made but not terribly remarkable gun. These would stay frontline in Swiss military service for well over 3 decades, because to the soldier who is just issued one of these, there's really no real major downside. I mean, they're not having to pay the cost. It is a more powerful gun than the Luger, at least the Swiss Luger. It is much more durable, reliable, easier to field strip and clean than the Luger. It's not any heavier. It's got a nice balance. Obviously, it's a service-sized gun, but it's not a pig or anything. So to the soldier, they was very well liked, and as a result, many of these have been used and are still used today in service competitions in Switzerland. And some police departments out of Switzerland that could afford to buy these did so, but obviously, the price tag deterred a lot of them. And there were so many guns floating around after World War II that there wasn't really a need for a lot of handguns for quite some time. Nevertheless, this is one of SIG's earliest commercial ventures. Up to this point, most of these other guns were manufactured specifically for use inside Switzerland. This was something they did try to export and market commercially, hence all the commercial high-polished and target models. So it is a very interesting gun, and it's probably the iconic Swiss service sidearm. Stop there. There. The P210 was successful for SIG. We don't know how many were produced in total, but they estimate at least 300,000. Obviously, many going to the military, but many others going to commercial and law enforcement. It was an acceptable gun feature and cost-wise by the 50s, but by the 1970s, it was just out of date, and the Swiss military was not purchasing new examples. Instead, it felt it was time to try to get current and also a little more economical, and that's where this gun came into the frame. This is the SIG P220, adopted into service as the pistol 1975 P75. Now this gun has an interesting history. It wasn't entirely developed by SIG, rather it was a joint project between SIG in Switzerland and Sauer in West Germany. What they came up with was a very nice modern pistol for the mid-70s. For one thing, it was one of the first guns to be designed and have its manufacturing assisted by computer-controlled CNC equipment. Very primitive as it might have been back then. What they wanted to do, aside from lower costs, they wanted a gun that was lighter, a little bit safer, Obviously, they wanted a double action that was becoming the standard at the time. It still fires, at least the Swiss military version, 9mm Parabellum, 9x19. Today, 9mm NATO, we could call it. It has a 4.4 to 4.5 inch barrel, depending on who you ask, so a little bit shorter barrel. Saves a little bit on weight, but still long enough for accuracy. The slide, instead of being machined steel, is actually stamped and welded steel. The frame is machined aluminum alloy. We have a double, single action trigger with a Decocker Safety. Now this Decocker, for anyone familiar with World War II guns, is much like Sauer's 38H pistol that they produced before and during World War II. So that's kind of one of Sauer's contributions. This also has internal safeties, like a firing pin safety, but no real manual safety otherwise than the Decocker. We do have a bolt holdback, slide holdback with release. We have a heel mounted mag release. This holds 9 cartridges and 9mm. We have synthetic type grips. We still have a nice grip angle. They curve around full back strap there, but not quite as elegant as the P210, of course. And this would quickly go into Swiss service and would be what they'd start to purchase in the 70s and 80s, and this would lead to the whole family we know today. Now, the parts for these were always made in West Germany by Sauer. However, some, such as the actual military P75, as well as some Swiss police, such as this one here, were assembled and tested in Switzerland. But the majority, the ones that are destined for export, for example, were made in Germany. This was to get around Switzerland's high labor costs and also just increasingly difficult to work with government rules regarding export. The first ones to come into America were imported under the Browning name, the Browning BDA. Some were in 9mm, but quickly 45 became popular over here, much to the point that when we think of the 220, we think of the 45 cartridge. But 9mm was the original. This would directly lead to guns that are very well known, such as the West German police's P225, the P6, which is essentially a compact version of this gun here. And of course the P226 itself, the double stack version, which came into service in the 80s and is still very much used today by so many people. And of course the compact version of that being the 228 and so on and so forth. I could sit here for 30 minutes rattling off all the names, but this was the beginning and you can see it. All the basic features are there. The double action, single action trigger, the Decocker, the stamped slide, the alloy frame. Of course the versions we know typically have the Browning style release here. The hammer is shaped a little differently. This one's kind of small. These early ones here have the slimmer ribbed trigger. Things like that. This one has, instead of a lanyard loop, this little guard here. This is it's a police gun. The military would have a small lanyard kind of piece that comes out here. It's just held on by the bottom screw. And while the Swiss military has stopped buying these, hasn't bought any for quite some time, this is still the standard issue for most of the Army today. I mean, obviously special units and others might use more modern guns like the 226 or the Glock, but the good old P75 is still the rank and file standard issue. Again, it was quite modern, especially its manufacturing techniques for the 70s. By today's standards, it doesn't completely look dated, but it's certainly not anywhere cutting edge. And it never really had quite the mystique that the 210 did. While it's quite accurate, it's not as accurate. While it's smooth, it's not quite as smooth. On the other hand, it is smaller and lighter, and it does have double action, and it does have a little higher capacity. So it does have things going for it. It just isn't quite as legendary as the 210 And it was, of course, much cheaper to produce and thus purchase. So that was why a lot of police departments would end up adopting some version of this throughout the 80s, and even some still use them today. And of course that led to SIG Sauer in the USA and all that, but that's a story for a different day. Well, folks, I am tired. It's been a long day. I just wanted to share these guns with you. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you didn't check out part 1, appreciate it if you'd do that. If you have checked out both, we really appreciate it. If you have any questions or would like to share your own Swiss guns, we'd love to hear about them in the comments below. If you liked the video, we'd appreciate it if you click like, and of course, if you'd like to help support us, please click on the link and check out our Patreon page. Well, this is Misha, and we'll catch you next time.